The great hall was silent save for one voice. It was a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through the air and the polished floor. This was the voice of Instructor Villar. He was a Xylosian, a very tall and dignified being. His fur was the color of dark silver, and his large green eyes slowly moved over his students. The students were the Qatar. They looked like large, graceful cats from an old Earth story. They had sleek fur in shades of orange, black, and gray, and their long tails were wrapped neatly around their feet. They were the cubs of their people, sent here to the Xylosian Orbital Institute to learn. Right now they were learning about hyperlane gravitational tides. It was not an exciting lesson. Instructor Villar's voice did not change tone. It was a steady, low drumbeat of facts and figures. The local gravity well of a Class 4 star will distort the tertiary lane by 0.03%, he droned. This requires a course correction of no less than 2.7 arcseconds. A small orange cub in the front row blinked very slowly. Its ears, which had been standing straight up, twitched and then drooped slightly to the sides. At the front of the hall, on a raised platform, sat two humans. One was a young man named Jin. He was the teaching assistant for this class. His job was to help the Qatar cubs if they had trouble with the lessons. He watched the cubs with careful eyes. He saw the orange cub's ears droop. He saw a black-spotted cub in the third row secretly grooming its paw. The students were bored. They were not learning. Jin felt a small knot of frustration in his stomach. He wished he could make the lesson more interesting, but it was not his place. Next to him was the other human, a young woman named Mirai. She was a specialist in human navigation systems. She was here to give a guest lecture after Instructor Villar was finished. Or that was the plan, but Mirai was in no state to lecture anyone. 2 days ago, a critical computer on the human part of the station had broken. This computer controlled the navigation for all the human ships. Mirai was the best programmer they had. She had worked for 48 hours without stopping to fix it. She had drunk enough coffee to make her hands shake and had only finished her work an hour before this lecture. She had come straight here, believing she could stay awake. She was wrong. Jin glanced at her. Her face was pale. Her dark hair was messy. She was sitting up straight, but her eyes were unfocused. She was fighting a battle against her own body, and she was losing. Instructor Villar continued, his voice a steady, somber hum. The recalculation of the theta frequency is therefore paramount to avoid a cascade failure in the warp field. Jin saw Mirai's head give a small, sudden jerk. She blinked rapidly, trying to force herself to pay attention. She straightened her back and folded her hands on the table. It was a good effort. For about 30 seconds, she was perfectly still and alert. Then the exhaustion returned like a heavy wave. Her eyelids became slow and heavy. They would close for a second, then fly open. Close, then open. Each time they closed, they stayed shut for a heartbeat longer. Her breathing, which had been quick and shallow, began to slow down and become deeper. Jin felt a spike of worry. He leaned over slightly. "Mirai," he whispered so softly that only she should have been able to hear it. She didn't react. Her body was shutting down. The deep, rhythmic sound of Villar's voice was like a lullaby. The warm, dim light of the hall was like a blanket. The stress of the last 2 days crashed down on her all at once. Her body decided it was time to sleep, and it did not care about lectures or guest speakers. Her chin dipped towards her chest. Her shoulders slumped. The muscles in her neck finally relaxed, and her head tilted to the side. A soft, slow breath escaped her lips. She was asleep. Deeply, completely asleep, right in the middle of Instructor Villar's lecture. For a moment, nothing happened. The deep voice of the instructor filled the hall. The cubs continued to sit in their quiet, restless boredom. Then, Instructor Villar's eyes fell upon the sleeping human. He stopped speaking mid-sentence, resulting in a parabolic shift in the... His voice trailed off. The sudden silence was louder than his voice had been. Every Qatar cub, now free from the monotonous sound, perked up. Their ears swiveled forward. Their bright eyes focused on the platform. They saw the human woman, fast asleep. Jin's heart hammered in his chest. This was bad. It was a great insult to fall asleep during a Xylosian lecture. He reached out under the table and gently shook Mirai's arm. "Mirai," he hissed, a little louder this time. "Wake up." She didn't stir. She was in a world of dreams, far away from hyperlanes and gravitational tides. Instructor Villar drew himself up to his full height. His silver fur bristled slightly. He was clearly offended. He opened his mouth, no doubt to say something sharp and disciplinary, but he never got the chance. From the middle of the seated cubs, a sound erupted. It was not a meow, not a cry. It was a yowl, a high-pitched, long, and deeply unhappy sound. It came from the small orange cub in the front row. Its face was not angry. It was distressed, as if in pain. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. And as soon as it ended, another cub, the black spotted one, let out a similar yowl. Then another. And another. In seconds, the entire hall was filled with a chorus of yowls and mewls. It was a wave of noise, a protest from dozens of young feline voices. The cubs were not making fun of Mirai. They were not laughing. They were crying out, their bodies tense, their tails puffed up. They were yowling, and they would not stop. The silence after Instructor Villar stopped talking did not last for even a full second. It was shattered by that first sharp yowl from the small orange cub. The sound was pure raw distress. It was not a noise of mischief or mockery. It was the sound of a young creature pushed to its limit. That single cry was the key that unlocked the entire room. Another cub, a gray one with tufted ears, immediately joined in. Its yowl was deeper, more of a wail. Then a third voice added to the chaos, and a fourth. The sound swelled, crashing over the lecture hall like a physical wave. It was a symphony of unhappiness. High-pitched mewls mixed with guttural cries. Some cubs stood up on their seats, their backs arched, their fur fluffed out to make them look bigger. Others pressed their ears flat against their heads and scrunched their eyes shut, adding their own miserable sounds to the din. Jin's mind raced. His first overwhelming feeling was one of panic. This was a disaster. Mirai was asleep, a deep insult to the Xylosians, and now the entire class of Qatar cubs was in an uproar. He had to wake her. Now. He turned to her, his own fear making his movements clumsy. He grabbed her shoulder and shook it, not gently anymore. "Mirai, wake up!" "Please," he said, his voice loud but almost completely lost in the wall of sound from the cubs. She mumbled something incoherent, her head lolling to the other side. She was so deeply asleep that his shaking felt like nothing more than a minor annoyance in her dream. She was gone, lost in a rest her body desperately needed. Jin felt a surge of helplessness. He looked out at the sea of upset cubs. He had to do something. He was the teaching assistant. It was his job to help. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He raised his hands, trying to get their attention. "Please, everyone quiet down," he shouted. His words were swallowed whole by the yowling. The cubs did not even look at him. Their focus was not on him or even on the sleeping Mirai anymore. Their collective distress had taken on a life of its own. They were reacting to something else, something Jin could not yet understand. He glanced at Instructor Villar. The large Xylosian was a statue of offended dignity. His green eyes were wide, his whiskers trembled with fury. He clearly saw this as a massive act of disobedience. The cubs were disrespecting the lecture, the institute, and him personally. He drew a deep breath, his chest swelling. "Silence," he boomed, his voice was powerful. It was the same voice he used for lectures, but now it was amplified by his anger. It cut through the higher-pitched yowls for a moment. A few of the cubs flinched, their cries faltering, but the effect did not last. The deep, loud noise seemed to cause them physical pain. The orange cub in the front actually covered its ears with its paws and let out a shriek that was even more piercing than before. The brief moment of quiet was broken, and the yowling returned, louder and more frantic than ever. The instructor's loud command had made everything worse. Jin's eyes darted across the room. He saw the cubs not as disobedient students, but as scared animals. He saw the way they flinched at Villar's shout. He saw the way they pressed their ears down. He saw the pained expressions on their little faces. This wasn't a protest against authority. This was a reaction to a sound. A bad sound. He stopped trying to shout over them. Instead, he focused. He listened. Really listened. The owls were not just random noise. Woven into the chaos were words. They were speaking in their own language, their cries punctuated with meaning. He heard it first from the gray, tufted-eared cub. Between its wails, it cried, "Stop! Stop the bad noise!" Another cub, a sleek black one, was mewling, "Hurt ears. It makes hurt ears." The orange cub's continuous cry resolved into a clear, repeated phrase, "Wrong sound. Wrong sound." A puzzle piece clicked into place in Jin's mind. They weren't yowling because Mirai fell asleep. They had started yowling the moment Villar had stopped talking. The silence had been a relief, But then seeing the instructor about to speak again, about to resume that deep, monotonous, rumbling lecture, had been too much for the orange cub. It had cried out in protest against the return of the sound it hated. The cubs weren't being bad. They were trying to protect their sensitive ears from what they perceived as an aggressive, painful noise. Valar's lecture was torture to them. Instructor Valar was preparing to shout again, his face a mask of fury. He was going to try to overpower them with his voice. Jin knew with sudden, cold certainty that it would only lead to more panic. It might even terrify the cubs into a complete frenzy. He had to act. He had to make the instructor understand. Jin moved quickly, circling the table to stand near the large Xylosian. The noise was deafening. He had to get very close, leaning in towards Valar's ear. "Instructor," Jin yelled, his voice strained. "You have to stop shouting." Valar looked down at him, his green eyes blazing with indignation. "They are being disruptive. They must learn discipline." "It's not discipline," Jin insisted, trying to keep his own voice from sounding panicked. "It's your voice. Your voice is hurting them." For a second, Instructor Valar looked utterly confused. The idea was so foreign to him. His voice was the voice of knowledge and authority. How could it cause pain? "Look at them," Jin pleaded, pointing at the cubs. "Look at their ears. Listen to what they are saying. They are crying hurt ears and wrong sound." Valar's eyes scanned the room again. He saw the flattened ears. He saw the pained expressions. He heard the words woven into the yowls. The anger on his face began to mix with a dawning confusion. He was a scholar. He was trained to observe. And now this human was pointing out observations he had missed. "What are you suggesting?" Valar asked, his voice still a loud rumble, but now edged with uncertainty. "Try not speaking loudly," Jin said, his mind racing back to his old xenopsychology studies. He remembered a brief note about the Qatar. Try murmuring, like a parent would to a cub. Softly. Instructor Valar stared at Jin. It was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard. To murmur in a lecture hall? It was undignified. It went against every teaching method he knew. He looked at the hysterical cubs. He looked at the sleeping human. He looked at the desperate face of the young man in front of him. He had no other options. With clear reluctance, Instructor Valar leaned down towards the audio pickup on his lectern. He took a slow breath. Then he began to speak again. But this time it was different. He did not project his voice. He let the words come out as a low, soft, rumbling murmur. It was a sound so deep and quiet it was almost a purr. "Please," he murmured, the word vibrating softly through the speakers. "Calm yourselves." The effect was instantaneous. The orange cub in the front stopped in mid-yowl. Its mouth closed. Its ears, which had been flat against its head, twitched and slowly rose. It tilted its head, its big eyes wide with surprise. The change spread through the room like a ripple on water. The yowls died away one by one, replaced by a stunned, attentive silence. The cubs that were standing slowly settled back onto their haunches. The puffed-out fur began to lie flat. They were all leaning forward slightly. Their ears swiveled toward the sound of Instructor Valar's murmuring voice. It was a sound that soothed them instead of hurting them. The hall was quiet again. The only sounds were the soft, rumbling murmur of the instructor and the steady, deep breathing of the sleeping Mirai, who had slept peacefully through the entire storm. The silence was thick and heavy. It was a different silence than before. The earlier silence had been bored and restless. This new silence was one of deep, focused attention. Every single Qatar cub was perfectly still. Their eyes were fixed on Instructor Valar. Their ears were perked forward, straining to catch every soft vibration of his voice. Instructor Valar continued to murmur, "Let us all return to our seats. There is no more need for alarm." His voice was a low, gentle rumble, like distant thunder on a calm day. The cubs obeyed instantly and quietly. They settled into their seats, their tails wrapping neatly around their feet once more. They looked calm. They looked ready to learn. It was a transformation that Jin could barely believe. He stood frozen, next to the instructor's lectern, his heart still pounding from the chaos. He watched the cubs, half expecting them to start yowling again at any second. But they didn't. They just waited, peaceful and patient. Instructor Valar glanced at Jin. There was no longer anger in his large green eyes. There was something else. Confusion and a flicker of respect. He gave Jin a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a thank you. Then, he turned back to the cubs. He leaned close to the audio pickup and resumed his lecture on hyperlane gravitational tides. But he did not return to his old, booming tone. He kept his voice in that new soft murmur. The recalculation of the theta frequency, he purred softly, is paramount to avoid a cascade failure. The cubs listened. One of them, the small orange one, even closed its eyes in what looked like contentment, its ears twitching slightly as it followed the lesson. Jin slowly walked back to his seat. His legs felt weak. He sat down heavily next to Mirai, who was still deep in her peaceful sleep. He looked at her, then out at the calm, attentive class. A strange feeling washed over him. It was relief, but it was also wonder. He had just seen a simple idea change everything. The rest of the lecture passed in a quiet hum. Instructor Villar finished his lesson without a single interruption. When he murmured, "The lecture is concluded," the cubs rose silently and began to file out of the hall. They did not rush or shove. They moved with a new calmness. As the last cub left, Jin finally allowed himself to relax. He put his head in his hands and took a deep, shuddering breath. The crisis was over. A soft nudge on his arm made him look up. It was Mirai. She was finally waking up. She blinked slowly, her eyes blurry with sleep. She stretched her arms and yawned. Then she looked around the empty lecture hall, confused. "Jin?" she said, her voice rough with sleep. "What happened? Did I miss the lecture?" She looked embarrassed. "I am so sorry, I just closed my eyes for a second." Jin couldn't help it. He started to laugh. It was a tired, relieved laugh. "You missed a lot, Mirai. You missed a whole lot." Just then, Instructor Villar approached their table. Mirai saw him and immediately stood up, her face turning red with shame. She bowed deeply. "Instructor Villar, I apologize profusely," she said quickly. "My behavior was unacceptable. I had no right to fall asleep during your lecture. It was deeply disrespectful." Instructor Villar looked at her. He then looked at Jin. His large feline face was unreadable for a moment. Then he did something surprising. He bowed his head slightly in return. "There is no need for an apology, Mirai," he murmured, still using his new, soft tone. "In fact, I believe we owe you thanks." Mirai stared at him, completely bewildered. "Thanks for falling asleep?" "Your indiscretion," Villar said, choosing his words carefully, "revealed a problem I was blind to. For cycles, I have struggled to keep the focus of my young students. I believed it was a lack of discipline. I was wrong." He turned his green eyes to Jin. "Your assistant saw the truth. He understood what the cubs were trying to say when they cried out. He understood that my teaching method was causing them distress." Mirai looked at Jin, her eyes wide with questions. "It was your voice, sir," Jin explained, feeling a little shy under the instructor's gaze. "It was too loud for them. Their hearing is very sensitive. When you started murmuring, they calmed down immediately." "Indeed," Villar said. He looked out at the empty seats, a thoughtful expression on his face. "For my entire career, I have been taught that a teacher's voice must be strong and clear. I never considered that strength could be painful." He looked back at the two humans. "You humans see things differently. You noticed what we in our traditions could not." He gestured for them to walk with him out of the lecture hall. "Come," he murmured. "We must report this to the head of the institute. This changes everything." They walked through the quiet, polished corridors of the Orbital Institute. The event had clearly shaken Instructor Villar. He was a being of habit and rules, and a human teaching assistant had just shown him a better way. They arrived at the office of the head of the institute, a Zelosian named Alara. She was older than Villar, her fur a lighter shade of silver, and her eyes held a deep wisdom. She listened intently as Villar explained everything. He told her about Mirai falling asleep. He described the sudden, distressing yowls of the cubs. He recounted Jin's quick thinking and his suggestion to murmur. Ilara listened without interrupting. When Valar finished, she turned her calm gaze to Jin. "Tell me, young man," she said, her own voice a soft, natural murmur. "How did you know? How did you understand what the cubs needed when their own instructor did not?" Jin thought for a moment. How could he explain it? It wasn't magic. It wasn't because humans were smarter. "Ma'am," he began, "humans, we don't have the same gifts as many species here. Our hearing is not very good. Our sense of smell is weak. We can't see in the dark." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Because of that, we had to learn to watch. We had to learn to see small things. A twitch of an ear. A change in posture. The look in someone's eyes. We had to learn to read the room." He looked at Instructor Valar. "We noticed the cubs were uncomfortable during lectures. We saw them flinch. We saw them cover their ears. We just put the pieces together. It wasn't a special skill. It was just paying attention." Head Ilara leaned back in her chair. A slow smile spread across her face. "Paying attention," she repeated softly. "It seems such a simple thing, but it is a powerful thing." She looked from Jin to Mirai. "Your species has a unique perspective. You see the problems we have learned to ignore. Today, your human need for sleep and your human power of observation have taught us a very valuable lesson." She stood up. "Instructor Valar, we will implement this new method. We will train all our teachers to use a softer tone with the juvenile Qatar. We will see if it improves their learning." Instructor Valar bowed. "It will be done, Head Ilara." As they left the office, Mirai walked beside Jin. The hallway was quiet. She nudged him with her elbow. "So," she said, a small smile on her face. "I guess my nap wasn't so bad after all." Jin smiled back, the last of the tension finally leaving his body. "No," he said, "I guess it wasn't." The news of what happened in the lecture hall spread through the Xylosian Orbital Institute like a soft breeze. It was not a story of scandal, but one of quiet wonder. The human Mirai had fallen asleep. The cubs had yowled. And the human Jin had found a solution. For the next few days, a new routine began. Instructor Valar, with some difficulty at first, continued to teach his classes in a soft murmur. The change in the Qatar cubs was immediate and remarkable. They were no longer restless. They did not fidget or groom themselves during lessons. They sat with a calm focus, their ears tuned to the gentle rumble of his voice. They began to answer questions correctly. They seemed happier. Jin and Mirai were asked to stay for a few more days. The Institute's leaders wanted to observe this new method. They wanted to understand it. One afternoon, Jin was walking through a quiet garden area on the station. The garden was a place of peace with soft lights and plants from many different worlds. He saw Instructor Valar sitting on a low bench looking at a small flowering bush. Jin almost turned to walk away, not wanting to disturb him. But Valar looked up and saw him. He gestured for Jin to come closer. "Please," Valar murmured. He was using his new teaching voice even here in the garden. It had become a habit. "Join me." Jin sat down on the bench. For a moment they sat in silence, watching the strange, glowing flowers. "I have been teaching for a long time," Valar said softly. "I have always believed in the old ways." A strong voice. A clear lesson. Discipline. He turned his large green eyes to Jin. "I thought the cubs were not trying hard enough. I thought they were lazy. I was frustrated with them." He looked back at the flowers. "I was wrong. And it took a human, someone from a species we consider less advanced, to show me I was wrong." He wasn't saying this to be mean. He was just stating a fact, something he was still trying to understand. "Your people lack so much. You have no natural claws. Your senses are dull. You need more sleep than most species. And yet you saw what I could not." Jin listened. He knew the Xylosians saw humans as a little bit primitive. He was used to it. "Can I ask you a question, Instructor?" Jin said, "Of course." "Why do you think we noticed?" Jin asked. "If we are so limited?" Valar was quiet for a while, thinking. "That is the question I have been asking myself." He finally murmured, "I do not know. It is a puzzle." "It's because we are limited," Jin said simply. Valar looked at him confused. Think about it. Jin continued. You Xylosians are very strong. You Qatar have amazing hearing and agility. You don't have to worry about the same things we do. A human on an old Earth would have to be very careful. We were not the fastest or the strongest. So we had to watch. We had to notice the small signs. Is that animal going to attack? Is that person lying? Is the weather changing? If we didn't pay attention to the small details, we would not survive. He picked up a fallen leaf from the garden path. It's the same here. We can't rely on our own senses, so we have to rely on watching others. We saw the cubs were in pain. It was a small detail, but for us, noticing small details is not a skill. It is a habit. It is how we live. Instructor Valar stared at Jin. The idea was so simple, but it was also profound. Humans compensated for their weaknesses by being more observant. Their disadvantage was their advantage, I see. Valar murmured. You are experts in observation because you had to be. Exactly, Jin said. Just then, Hedalara walked into the garden. She saw them talking and came over. She had a datapad in her hand. Instructor Valar. Jin, she greeted them with a soft nod. I have the first results from the new teaching method. She looked at the datapad. The test scores for the Qatar juvenile classes have improved by 20% in just 3 days. Reports of stress and anxiety among the cubs have dropped dramatically. She looked up, her wise eyes moving from Valar to Jin. It is a stunning success. We will be implementing this across the entire juvenile wing of the Institute. She sat down on the bench with them. We have been discussing this among the senior staff. We have many advanced species here. Species with great intelligence or physical power, but we realize we have overlooked the unique value of humanity. She smiled at Jin. You are not the strongest. You are not the fastest. But you are the ones who see the cracks that everyone else walks over. You are the ones who notice when something is wrong. She handed the datapad to Valar. We are creating a new position. A cultural observer. We want a human to sit in on classes, to watch interactions between different species, to help us see the problems we are blind to. We would like you, Jin, to be the first. Jin was speechless. He just stared at Hedalara. This was a great honor. It was a job that no human had ever held on the station. I don't know what to say, he stammered. Say yes. Mireille's voice came from behind them. She walked into the garden looking much more rested and alert than before. She had heard the last part of the conversation. She grinned at Jin. It's a perfect job for you. You're the one who noticed my sleeping was a good thing. Everyone smiled, even Instructor Valar. It is true, Valar said. Your nap was the key that unlocked the door. He looked at Hedalara. I support this decision completely. The human perspective has value we do not possess. Hedalara nodded. Then it is settled. Jin, you will be our first human cultural observer. Your job is to do what you do best. Watch. And tell us what you see. Jin felt a warm feeling of pride. For so long, humans had tried to prove they were as good as the other species. They tried to be as strong, as smart, as advanced. But now they were being valued for something truly human. For their empathy. For their power of observation. For their ability to care about a small orange cub with hurt ears. He looked at Mireille, who gave him an encouraging nod. He looked at Instructor Valar, who now saw him as a colleague. He looked at Hedalara, who saw the potential in his people. Yes, Jin said, his voice firm and clear. I accept. Thank you for the opportunity. He knew then that humanity's place in the stars would not be won by being the loudest or the strongest. It would be won by being the ones who noticed when someone needed a quieter voice. It would be won by paying attention. A week had passed since the day of the Great Yowling. The Xylosian Orbital Institute felt different. It was not a change you could see, but one you could feel. A sense of calm had settled over the sections where the young Qatar lived and learned. The air was no longer tense with the stress of unhappy cubs. Jin stood in the same large lecture hall. But he was not sitting at the assistant's table. He stood at the side of the room, a simple datapad in his hand. He was the new cultural observer. His job was to watch, to learn, to see the small things. The hall was full of Qatar cubs. They were the same students from before. The small orange one was there in the front row. It saw Jin and its ears twitched in a friendly way. Jin smiled back. At the front of the room, Instructor Valar was at his lectern. He was not alone. Next to him stood Mireille. She was finally giving her guest lecture. She looked well-rested and confident. She wore a simple human-style outfit, and she held a small controller for her presentation. Instructor Villar leaned toward the audio pickup. "Good morning, students," he murmured, his voice a soft, deep purr that filled the room gently. The cubs listened quietly. There was no fidgeting, no bored grooming, just calm attention. "We have a special presentation today," Villar continued in his murmur. "Our guest, Mireille, will explain how human navigation systems work. Please give her your full attention." He then nodded to Mireille and took a step back, giving her the stage. Mireille stepped forward. She looked out at the audience of young feline faces. She began to speak. She used her normal human voice. It was not a loud voice, but it was not a murmur either. It was just a clear, conversational tone. Jin watched the cubs closely, his observer's mind already working. He saw their ears twitch, but they were not flattening in pain. They were just adjusting to the new sound. The orange cub tilted its head, curious. The sound of a human voice was different from a Xylosian's, even a murmured one. It was higher in pitch, but it did not have the low, rumbling vibration that had once hurt their sensitive ears. To them, it was just interesting. Mireille started her presentation. She showed images of old human ships and new star charts. She explained how humans use computers to find their way through the vast, empty spaces between stars. She talked about the problems they faced and the clever solutions they invented. The cubs were fascinated. They had never heard about navigation from this perspective. The Xylosian method was all about complex math and gravity. The human method was about pattern recognition and computer code. It was a new way of thinking. About halfway through her talk, Mireille told a story. It was about a time a human ship got lost because of a single tiny mistake in the code. It was a funny story, and she told it with a smile. A few of the cubs made a soft sound. It was not a yowl. It was a quiet, chirping noise. Jin realized with surprise that they were laughing. The Qatar cubs were laughing at a human story. He looked over at Instructor Villar. The large Xylosian was watching the cubs, his head tilted. He had never heard them make that sound during a lecture before. He saw their engaged faces, their bright eyes. He saw that they were learning and they were enjoying it. A slow, deep rumble started in his chest. It was so quiet that only Jin, standing nearby, could hear it. Instructor Villar was purring. He was content Mireille finished her lecture. "Thank you for listening," she said. For a moment, there was silence. Then the orange cub in the front row lifted a paw. It was a polite request to speak. Mireille looked surprised but pleased. "Yes, you have a question?" The cub spoke in its soft young voice. "Your computers. They are not as strong as Xylosian computers. How do they not break all the time?" Mireille smiled. "That's a very good question. They do break sometimes. That's why we need good programmers to fix them. We humans are very good at fixing things. We make mistakes, but we are also very good at repairing them." The cub seemed to think about this, then nodded its head in understanding. Another cub raised its paw. "Do human ships have places to sleep?" "Nice places?" Mireille laughed. "Yes, we do. We call them quarters, and they are very important. A tired pilot makes mistakes." She glanced over at Jin, a playful look in her eye. "And a tired programmer might fall asleep during a very important lecture." Jin felt his face get warm. The cubs made their chirping laugh again. They understood the joke. The event that had once been a disaster was now just a funny story. A lesson they had all learned from. The question session continued for a while. The cubs were curious and intelligent. They asked about human food, about human families, about what Earth was like. Mireille answered them all with patience and honesty. Finally, the session was over. The cubs stood up and began to file out of the hall. They moved past Mireille, and a few of them brushed against her legs in a gesture of feline friendship. It was their way of saying thank you. Soon the hall was empty except for Jin, Mireille, and Instructor Villar. Villar walked over to them. He was still making that soft purring sound. "Mireille," he murmured, "that was an excellent lecture." The students were fully engaged. They learned a great deal. "Thank you, Instructor," Mireille said. "They asked wonderful questions." Villar turned to Jin. "And you, observer? What did you see?" Jin looked down at his data pad. He hadn't written a single note. He looked up and smiled. "I saw that they like her voice. Her normal human voice doesn't bother them. It's only the very low rumbling frequencies that cause pain. I saw that they are curious about us, and I saw that they are happy. Instructor Villar nodded slowly. Yes, they are happy. It is a good thing to see. He looked from one human to the other. You have both taught this institute a valuable lesson. We thought we knew everything about teaching. You showed us that there is always more to learn. You showed us the value of a different point of view. He bowed his head to them, a deep sign of respect. Thank you. As Villar left the hall, Mirai let out a long, happy sigh. Well, she said, that went a lot better than last time. Jin laughed. Just a little. They walked out of the lecture hall together. The corridor outside was quiet. The station hummed softly around them. A giant machine full of many different lives. You know, Jin said, for a long time, I thought humans had to be like everyone else to be accepted here. Louder, stronger, smarter. Mirai nodded. I know what you mean. But we don't, Jin said, the realization feeling solid and true. We just have to be ourselves. We have to be the ones who notice things. We have to be the ones who care enough to find a better way. Mirai linked her arm with his. And sometimes, she said with a grin, we have to be the ones who take a nap at the wrong time to start it all. Jin smiled, looking down the long, peaceful corridor. The instructors now murmured the cubs were learning and humanity had found its own small, important place in the stars. It was a good start.